It was a crisp autumn morning when the sound of metal scraping against concrete jolted Sam awake at 5:30 a.m. Still in her pajamas, she rushed to the front door, her heart pounding with a mix of confusion and dread. What she saw outside would forever change her perception of the neighborhood she had once called home. There, on her front porch, two men in Willow Creek Estates HOA polos were wrapping a heavy, industrial-grade chain around her sister Lisa's wheelchair. The chain was secured to the porch railing with a massive padlock, rendering the wheelchair mobile. Sam's breath caught her throat as she ran outside barefoot, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "What are you doing?" "That's my sister's wheelchair." The taller of the two men handed her a piece of paper, his expression cold and detached. "Mobility devices must be stored out of sight per HOA bylaw 23.4. This is your third warning." Sam's mind raced. Third warning? They had never received any warnings. Lisa had only moved in 3 months ago after a tragic car accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. The wheelchair wasn't just a piece of equipment. It was Lisa's lifeline, her means of independence. Sam's voice cracked as she protested, but the men simply climbed into their golf cart and drove away, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. Lisa appeared in the doorway behind Sam, using crutches she hadn't touched in weeks. Her face was pale, her voice shaking. "What's happening, Sam?" Sam tried to stay calm for her sister's sake, but inside, she was seething. This wasn't just about a wheelchair. It was about dignity, respect, and the right to live without fear of harassment. Lisa had worked tirelessly in physical therapy to regain some semblance of independence. And now, in an instant, that independence had been stripped away. Sam called a locksmith, but he couldn't come until the afternoon. Lisa was in tears. "I have my new job interview today. I can't miss it." Sam helped Lisa into her car, determined not to let this injustice derail her sister's progress. But as they drove to the interview, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. Later that day, after the locksmith had cut the chain and freed the wheelchair, Sam sat down to read through the 94 pages of HOA guidelines. She was determined to understand the rules that had been used to justify such a heartless act. What she found was both infuriating and revealing. There was indeed a bylaw stating that mobility devices must be stored inside or in designated areas. But the rule was clearly intended for items like bicycles and scooters, not medical equipment essential for someone's daily life. The HOA's interpretation of the rule was not only cruel, but also seemed deliberately designed to target families like hers. Sam decided to take action. She emailed the HOA board, explaining Lisa's disability and requesting an accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act ADA. She hoped that reason and compassion would prevail. But within an hour, she received a response that left her stunned. "Your request for exemption is denied. Additionally, the unauthorized wheelchair ramp at your front entrance must be removed within 48 hours. Sam's hands trembled as she read the email. The ramp had been approved by the city, and she had the permits to prove it. How could the HOA override city regulations? The next day, she called the city planning office to confirm that her permits were in order. They were. But when she returned home, she found a $500 fine taped to her door for unauthorized modifications. As if that weren't enough, Sam spotted Barbara Thompson, the HOA president, taking pictures of her house from a sidewalk. Barbara was in her early 60s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive tennis outfit, despite never using the community courts. Sam approached her, tried to remain calm. "Barbara, can we talk about this situation? My sister Lisa has a disability, and this ramp is essential for her." Barbara cut her off with a cold, dismissive tone. "Rules are rules. Your sister's condition doesn't entitle you to decrease property values for everyone else." Sam's frustration boiled over. The ramp is barely visible from the street, and chaining down a wheelchair isn't just cruel, it's probably illegal. Barbara's eyes narrowed, and she delivered a chilling ultimatum. Perhaps Willow Creek isn't the right community for your family's needs. As Barbara walked away, Sam noticed the blatant hypocrisy. The Petersons' holiday inflatables were still up from last Christmas, and Mr. Rivera's boat was parked in his driveway, both clear violations of HOA rules. Yet, these infractions were ignored. It was clear that the rules were being selectively enforced, and Sam was being targeted. As Sam dug deeper, she began to uncover a disturbing pattern of selective enforcement within the HOA. It wasn't just about the wheelchair or the ramp. It was about who you were and whether you fit into Barbara Thompson's vision of the perfect neighborhood. Sam's neighbor, Diane Peterson, stopped by one afternoon with her 3 unauthorized garden gnomes. "Such a shame what Barbara's doing to you folks," Diane whispered. "She doesn't like changes to the neighborhood aesthetic. The Millers had to move after their son got a service dog." Sam's heart sank as she realized that her family wasn't the first to be targeted. She began documenting every instance of selective enforcement she could find. The Wilson family had been fined $300 for their daughter's basketball hoop, while the treasurer's identical hoop went unnoticed. Barbara's son parked his commercial truck at her house every weekend, a clear violation of HOA rules, yet no action was taken. The more Sam looked, the more she found. The HOA had denied her request for solar panels, citing aesthetic concerns, but proved an identical installation for one of Barbara's friends. It was a system designed to benefit those in power, while punishing anyone who dared to challenge the status quo. Sam's research led her to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and she discovered that the HOA's actions were not just unfair. They were illegal. Federal law prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities, and the chaining of Lisa's wheelchair was a clear violation. Armed with this knowledge, Sam prepared to confront the HOA board at their next meeting. As Sam delved deeper into Barbara Thompson's history, she uncovered a disturbing pattern of discrimination that extended far beyond her own family. Barbara had been running the HOA for 15 years, and during that time, she had systematically targeted families she deemed undesirable. The Millers, who had been forced to move after their son got a service dog, were just one example. Old Mrs. Wilkins, who had been fined repeatedly for her ugly medical equipment on the porch, was another. Barbara's disdain for anyone who didn't fit her narrow vision of the perfect neighborhood was evident in every decision she made. Sam's neighbor, Kevin Jackson, revealed that Barbara had been recorded using derogatory language about people with disabilities. "She told the board your sister makes a neighborhood look like a hospital zone," Kevin said, his voice filled with disgust. Sam's blood boiled as she realized the depth of Barbara's prejudice. This wasn't just about rules and regulations. It was about power, control, and a blatant disregard for the rights and dignity of others. Barbara's actions were not only morally reprehensible, but also a clear violation of federal law. As if discrimination and selective enforcement weren't enough, Sam soon discovered that Barbara's corruption extended to the HOA's finances. One morning, she found a large envelope slipped under her door. Inside were financial documents showing that the HOA had paid $45,000 to a landscaping company owned by Barbara's brother for work that was never completed. The note attached to the documents read, "I'm on the budget committee. There's more. Be careful who you trust." Sam's heart raced as she realized the extent of Barbara's financial misconduct. She made copies of the documents and locked the originals in her safe. This was the smoking gun she needed to expose Barbara's corruption to the entire community. Sam's research led her to the county records office, where she discovered that her wheelchair ramp was entirely within her property line, not on common areas as the HOA had claimed. This revelation further exposed the lies and manipulation at the heart of the HOA's actions. When 3 board members, including Barbara, knocked on her door to offer a compromise, Sam remained calm but firm. "That's not a reasonable accommodation under federal law," she said. "And I like to discuss these financial records showing HOA funds paid to your brother's company." Barbara's face went pale, and the other board members exchanged nervous glances. "You're making a big mistake," Barbara hissed. "I've been running this community for 15 years. People who challenge me don't last long here." But Sam was undeterred. She knew that the truth was on her side, and she was determined to fight for justice, not just for her family, but for the entire community. One evening, as Sam was preparing dinner, there was a knock on her back door. It was Kevin Jackson, her neighbor from across the street. Kevin had always been friendly but quiet, often seen tending to his garden or chatting with other neighbors. But tonight, his demeanor was different, serious, almost urgent. "Don't react to what I'm about to tell you," Kevin said quietly, glancing over his shoulder as if someone might be watching. "I'm not just your neighbor. I'm with the FBI's white-collar crime division." Sam's mouth fell open in shock. The FBI? In their quiet suburban neighborhood? Kevin handed her his badge, and the reality of the situation began to sink in. He explained that the FBI had been investigating Barbara Thompson and the Willow Creek Estate's HOA for months. What started as a probe into financial fraud had expanded to include civil rights violations after numerous complaints of discrimination. Barbara's been running the scam in multiple neighborhoods for years, Kevin explained. She takes over HOAs, changes the rules, and uses her power to force out families she doesn't want. Families like yours. Sam's mind raced as Kevin detailed the extent of Barbara's corruption. She had been skimming money from HOA funds, taking kickbacks from contractors, and using special assessments, like the one for community pool repairs, to line her own pockets. Half of the $800 Sam had paid for the pool repairs had gone straight into Barbara's personal account. "But why chain my sister's wheelchair?" Sam asked, still struggling to understand a personal vendetta. Kevin's expression darkened. "Barbara targets anyone she sees as lowering property values. She's been recorded using horrible language about people with disabilities. We have emails where she told the board your sister makes the neighborhood look like a hospital zone." Sam's blood boiled at the thought. This wasn't just about money or power. It was about prejudice and cruelty. Kevin handed her a small device, a special voice recorder. "We need your help to build our case. Get her to admit to the wheelchair incident, and maybe talk about the HOA finances. But be careful. Barbara has friends in the local police department, too." As Kevin left, Sam sat in the dark living room, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. From down the hall, she could hear Lisa struggling to get from her wheelchair to her bed without help. The sound of her quiet frustration made Sam's decision clear. She picked up her phone and typed a single word: pool. The next day, Sam met Kevin at the community playground, pretending to chat about baseball while secretly discussing their plan. Kevin handed her a coffee cup with the hidden recorder inside. "Just press the bottom of the cup to activate it," he whispered. The plan was simple but risky. That evening, there was an emergency HOA meeting, and Barbara was expected to announce another special assessment for security cameras. Kevin knew the money would disappear, just like the funds for the clubhouse renovation. Sam's role was to publicly challenge Barbara about the wheelchair incident, hoping to provoke her into a private confrontation where she might incriminate herself. As Sam arrived at the clubhouse that evening, she felt a mix of nerves and determination. The room was packed, with neighbors standing along the walls. Barbara sat at the front table with her loyal board members, wearing her usual fake smile. Before Barbara could start the meeting, Sam stood up. "I'd like to address the illegal chaining of my disabled sister's wheelchair," she said loudly, holding up the heavy chain that had been used. The room fell silent. Barbara's smile vanished. "That matter was handled according to HOA bylaws," she said coldly. "Your personal grievances aren't on tonight's agenda." But Sam wasn't backing down. "This is discrimination against a person with disabilities. It violates federal law." Several neighbors gasped, and Barbara's face turned red. "Your sister's equipment was improperly stored," she snapped. "The board's decisions are final." The meeting dissolved into chaos as Sam pressed further, accusing Barbara of selective enforcement and financial misconduct. Barbara abruptly ended the meeting, but as Sam lingered in the parking lot, Barbara stormed over to her car. "You've made a serious mistake," Barbara hissed, jabbing her finger at Sam's chest. "Your little stunt tonight will cost you." Sam pressed the bottom of the coffee cup, activating the recorder. "Are you threatening me, Barbara?" "I'm promising you consequences," Barbara said. "Your sister's wheelchair was just the beginning. Keep pushing and you'll find your car towed, your trees cut down, and fines you can't possibly pay." Barbara stepped closer, her voice dripping with venom. "People like your sister bring down property values. I've worked too hard building this community to let people like you ruin it. The same way I got rid of the Gonzalez family and their noisy kids, and old Mrs. Wilkins with her ugly medical equipment on the porch." Sam's hand shook with anger, but she kept recording. "And the money for the clubhouse renovation? The new security system?" Barbara gave a small, smug smile. Managing an HOA isn't free. Consider my compensation for keeping undesirables out. As Barbara walked away, she turned back with one final threat. I'd start packing if I were you. By this time next month, you won't be able to afford to live here anymore. After the confrontation with Barbara, Sam knew she couldn't fight this battle alone. She created a private Facebook group called Willow Creek Transparency and invited everyone in the neighborhood except the board members. By evening, 50 neighbors had joined. Sam shared her documentation of selective rule enforcement, complete with time-stamped photos. The comments poured in, each one revealing another layer of Barbara's corruption. They fined me $300 for my daughter's basketball hoop, but ignored the identical one at the treasurer's house. One neighbor wrote, Barbara's son parks his commercial truck at her house every weekend, against HOA rules. Another added, they denied my request for solar panels, but approved one for Barbara's friend. A third neighbor revealed. The flood of stories was overwhelming, but it also gave Sam hope. The community she thought had turned against her was actually filled with people who had been bullied into silence. They were ready to stand up, but they needed someone to lead the charge. The next HOA meeting was a turning point. Sam arrived with her folder of evidence and the recording of Barbara's threats. The room was packed, with many neighbors standing along the walls. Barbara sat at the front table, her usual fake smile in place. Before Barbara could start the meeting, Sam stood up. I'd like to address the illegal chaining of my disabled sister's wheelchair, she said loudly, holding up the heavy chain. The room fell silent. Barbara's smile vanished. That matter was handled according to HOA bylaws, she said coldly. Your personal grievances aren't on tonight's agenda. But Sam wasn't backing down. This is discrimination against a person with disabilities. It violates federal law. Several neighbors gasped, and Barbara's face turned red. Your sister's equipment was improperly stored, she snapped. The board's decisions are final. The meeting dissolved into chaos as Sam pressed further, accusing Barbara of selective enforcement and financial misconduct. Barbara abruptly ended the meeting, but as Sam lingered in the parking lot, Barbara stormed over to her car. You've made a serious mistake, Barbara hissed, jabbing her finger at Sam's chest. Your little stunt tonight will cost you. Sam pressed the bottom of the coffee cup, activating the recorder. Are you threatening me, Barbara? I'm promising you consequences, Barbara said. Your sister's wheelchair was just the beginning. Keep pushing, and you'll find your car towed, your trees cut down, and fines you can't possibly pay. Barbara stepped closer, her voice dripping with venom. People like your sister bring down property values. I've worked too hard building this community to let people like you ruin it. The same way I got rid of the Gonzalez family and their noisy kids, and old Mrs. Wilkins with her ugly medical equipment on the porch. Sam's hands shook with anger, but she kept recording. And the money for the clubhouse renovation, the new security system? Barbara gave a small, smug smile. Managing an HOA isn't free. Consider it my compensation for keeping undesirables out. As Barbara walked away, she turned back with one final threat. I'd start packing if I were you. By this time next month, you won't be able to afford to live here anymore. After the meeting, Barbara's threats became more overt. Sam returned home to find a brick thrown through Lisa's bedroom window with a note attached, leave or worse. The intimidation tactics were escalating, but so was Sam's resolve. Kevin, the undercover FBI agent, assured Sam that they were close to bringing Barbara down. This changes things, he said grimly. Now we've got criminal intimidation. Sam's role in the investigation was far from over, but she knew she was fighting for something bigger than herself. She was fighting for her sister, for her neighbors, and for the principle that no one should be bullied or discriminated against in their own community. The tension in Willow Creek Estates had reached a boiling point. Sam had gathered enough evidence to expose Barbara Thompson's corruption, but she knew the final blow would come from the FBI. That day arrived sooner than expected. Early one morning, as the sun rose over the quiet neighborhood, unmarked cars pulled into the community. FBI agents, led by Kevin Jackson, moved swiftly and decisively. Barbara Thompson was in her driveway, dressed in her usual pristine tennis outfit. when Kevin approached her, holding up his FBI badge. "Barbara Thompson," he announced loudly so everyone could hear. "The FBI has been watching you and your HOA board for the past 8 months." Neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion. The Jacksons across the street, the elderly Fosters from next door, even the Petersons, who had always supported Barbara, stopped watering their illegal garden to stare in shock. Barbara's face turned white as a ghost. "This isn't what it looks like," she stammered, dropping her clipboard. "I'm just enforcing the rules everyone agreed to." Kevin shook his head. "Rules you change without proper votes. Rules you only applied to certain people. Rules that break federal disability laws." More FBI agents arrived, carrying boxes and equipment. One agent handed Sam the heavy chain that had been used to restrain Lisa's wheelchair. "We found this in Barbara's garage," the agent said. "We have video evidence of her placing it there." Barbara's perfectly styled hair seemed to deflate as she realized she was truly caught. The agent began searching her house, uncovering boxes of documents, hard drives, and most shockingly, a safe filled with cash and jewelry, all bought with HOA funds. As the reality of Barbara's crime sank in, the neighborhood erupted in a mix of anger and relief. The Andersons, whose children's treehouse had been torn down the previous summer, recorded everything on their phones. Mr. Foster, who used a walker himself, shouted, "That money was supposed to fix the community pool. You said there wasn't enough in the budget." Barbara tried to reach her car, but another agent blocked her path. "We have a warrant to search your home in the HOA office," he said, holding up official papers. Sam watched as Barbara's world crumbled around her. It was a moment of vindication, not just for her family, but for the entire community. That evening, an emergency community meeting was called at the clubhouse. Almost every household in Willow Creek Estates attended, the largest turnout in neighborhood history. People shared story after story of Barbara's tyranny. Mrs. Garcia stood up first. "She fined me $300 for my daughter's basketball hoop, but ignored the identical one at the Wilsons' house." Mr. Patel added, "She denied my request for a security light after my break-in, but approved her friend's backyard spotlight that shines right into my bedroom." The FBI presented evidence of Barbara's financial misconduct, including the fake landscaping company that charged the HOA double the normal rates, with half the money going straight to Barbara's personal account. They showed bank records of her vacation home in Florida and her luxury car, all paid for with HOA funds. The room buzzed with anger and disbelief. "How did you catch her?" someone asked Sam. Sam held up the heavy chain that had been used on Lisa's wheelchair. "It started with this," she said. "She went too far when she targeted someone who couldn't defend themselves. But Lisa and I decided to fight back, with evidence, not anger." The crowd erupted in applause. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt united, no longer silenced by fear. By a majority vote, a temporary board was established that night. To Sam's surprise, they asked her to join. "We need someone who stands up for what's right," said Mrs. Foster, one of the neighborhood's most respected elders. The new board's first official act was to pass a comprehensive accessibility policy, with Lisa as a consultant. All violation notices were suspended, while the bylaws were rewritten to be fair and clear. "This isn't about getting revenge," Sam told a newspaper reporter who covered their story. "It's about making sure everybody feels welcome in their own neighborhood." The changes were swift and impactful. The infamous wheelchair chain now hung in the community center, with a small plaque that read, "Freedom sometimes requires courage, community, and occasionally the FBI." 2 months later, the neighborhood gathered for its first block party, a celebration of unity and renewal. Children played on lawns without fear of violation notices, and neighbors who had lived next door to each other for years finally became friends. The Martinez family's son, who used a walker like Lisa, demonstrated the new accessible playground equipment installed with recovered funds. As Lisa and Sam watched their neighbors laughing and sharing food, Lisa squeezed Sam's hand. "Thank you for not giving up," she said. "Some change you can see and some you can't. We broke both kinds." Barbara's house stood empty, waiting for sale. Sometimes, neighbors would pause as they walked by, still processing how one person had gained so much control over their lives. But mostly, People were looking forward, not back. Yesterday, Lisa rolled easily up the gentle slope of a new community-wide pathways, racing the neighborhood kids on their bikes. No chains, no barriers, no fear. She smiled at Sam and said something Sam would never forget. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting better.